Hello and welcome to the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. To begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to leaders and elders past, present and emerging. We are delighted to be presenting the 2020 BIIF, the 10th anniversary of celebrating invention and innovation in Bendigo. This session, Logistics, Automation and Industry 4.0, is brought to you by our partner Keach Casting and contributors KPMG and the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre. Today's guests are Business Performance Specialist and Partner at KPMG, Brendan Richards, and Chair of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Sector, Paul Cooper. To start us off, Brendan will explore the topic of logistics mindset. Brendan has long advocated for the importance of applying a logistics mindset to organisations that want to optimise their efficiency, maximise their profit and modernise their operations so they can grow. He believes logistics is not an industry but a function integral to all industries. To tell us more, we are pleased to welcome Brendan today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for having me and delighted to be part of the program.
Well, I'll hand over to you now and I'll join you at the end for some questions after your presentation.
Terrific. I've been asked to speak today about one of my chief passions, logistics. What you might not know, however, is that I'm actually a business restructuring and turnaround professional, and some people find that to be a pretty gloomy profession and somewhat incongruous with the overarching theme of this event being optimism. But there are so many lessons to be learnt from the fortunes, either good or bad, of others. And as I'll talk about, many of those lessons actually revolve around logistics. Now, the most commonly asked question that's put to me when I'm appointed as the administrator or receiver of a business is, why did the business fail? Typically, people who do what I do for a living will answer that it was a function of cash flow, the business was making losses, it ultimately ran out of money, and that happened because a major contract was lost or because a customer didn't pay a bill or something of that nature. But in actual fact, the reason for the failure is usually the product of something else, and it's typically not an external force. It's almost always something to do with the people within that business. And there are a number of character traits that typically are prevalent in a business failure. But one of the core ones, and one of the ones that we want to explore today, is that trait of complacency. And what causes the mentality that so many prescribe to, that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is fundamentally a mindset or an attitude that you see repeatedly in businesses that ultimately fail. Now, if you never question your business model and the way you do things, then eventually your business is likely to lose relevance. And being relevant is the primary thing that will keep you in business, and it will keep your business growing. One of the most common causes of business failure is the loss of relevance. Businesses don't recognise the need for change or don't acknowledge that change is even happening around them. They simply become sitting ducks for that one word that we all are so fearful of in the business community, and that's disruption. Now, for the ubiquity of the term disruption, there hasn't been a time more disruptive in our lives than the year 2020. We'll never forget the global human toll of COVID-19 and the long-lasting impact on the families and communities of those who have been affected by it. But at the same time, it will also make its mark in history as something of a watershed moment. We've said many times in recent history that the world has hit an inflection point in the rate of change. Well, we certainly have now. The accelerated rate of digital adoption, the almost immediate acceptance of new ways of working, and the adaptability demonstrated by people and businesses on the back of COVID has been absolutely awe-inspiring. The fact that we can even do this conference in this manner and ensure continuity of the messages is incredible. Without any notice, our conventions have been turned on their head, and yet we've risen to the challenge and we've quickly found new and better ways of doing things. And in the same time, or in the time rather, that we're forced to work from home, new habits have been formed, and now a return to the old normal is almost too tedious to contemplate. We simply just don't want to go back to the old ways of doing things. Now, of course, all of this has happened in response to a specific event. Now, we may have slowly come to the same outcome in more organic circumstances, but that really may have taken years. Now, in all of this, my point is simple. Instead of waiting for major events to cause a change in our behaviour, let's make a habit of opening our minds to completely different ways of doing things. Let's adopt a mindset of constant disruption, and let's get away from that old view that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It is just too restrictive a mentality in a fast-changing world. There are way more effective ways for us to be able to serve our clients, our customers, and our community. More effective ways to add value. And all we need to do is develop the right mindset. And my contention is that the most relevant mindset is a logistics mindset. And as I'll talk about shortly, it's the hidden logistics corridors that are at the centre of every business recovery and every business success. And identifying them is the key. Now, people often confuse technology and logistics, or defer to discussion about the technology. But they can often be so focused on the technology that they miss the problem that the technology is trying to solve, which is ultimately a logistical one. So if we look at some of the new technologies of the last 10 years, things like 3D printing, blockchain, even online retailing, they've all been brought about by evolutions in technology. But what truly underlies their relevance is logistics. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a logistics mindset. If we just look at technology, we will be boxed into a certain way of thinking. If we sit back and look at what it is that we're trying to solve for, whether we utilize new technology or solve for it some other way, we will recognize that the heart of that problem is a logistical challenge. And if we keep our minds focused on that, then we are very likely to come up with a solution or the identification of something new that we just simply wouldn't see had we maintained a fixation on technology alone. If you look at every practical problem faced with the rapid onset of COVID, the solutions have all been found in logistics. As I mentioned before, the way we're going about this conference, video conferencing, this very event, working from home, online shopping, all of these sorts of things that have just now become embedded in our new way of life have all ultimately been developed to solve for a logistical challenge caused by not being able to be out and about, going to places physically. Now, what's more, if you look at virtually every new exciting business that's been launched globally over the past few years, things like Uber, Airbnb, Amazon, Airtasker, things of that nature, all new business models, things that we wrap under the umbrella term of disruption, their models ultimately are all based on logistics. If you consider that these are businesses that simply came out of nowhere and provided a solution that nobody had ever previously contemplated, you wouldn't be correct. The reality is all they're doing is taking something that already exists in one form, adding it to something that already exists in another form, and bringing the two concepts together to create a different way of solving for an old problem. Now, if you'd been focused on what that problem was, then you'd have identified it as a logistical one, and the way you would have gone about solving for it may have been quite different. Now, sure, These are business models that have utilised and leveraged technology, but in turn, that technology has been utilised for ultimately solving a more holistic issue, which is a logistics problem. Now, if you want to have success of these sorts of businesses or emulate them in any way, then you need to be looking for opportunities in logistics. The technology itself is simply a means to an end. So that gives you some flavour for what I'm talking about when I talk about a logistics mindset. But what do I mean when I talk about hidden logistics corridors? I'll give you an example of something that people of my age might well relate to. You may be familiar with the old TV show that existed in the 1970s and early 1980s called MASH. Now, MASH is an acronym that stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, and the TV series was all based on a MASH unit in the Korean War. But what didn't necessarily come across to all of the viewers of MASH was that that many of the stories that sat behind the TV series were actually real. And the MASH unit itself was conceived by a cardiologist, in fact, by the name of Michael E. DeBakey, and a group of other surgical consultants. And it was developed in response to a single central problem. And that is, how do we maximise the experience and the fighting effectiveness of our troops in a war scenario? Now, a non-logistics mindset would be looking at very sensible issues, but things like training, weapons, and strategy. But DeBakey saw things quite differently. And as General Omar Bradley said, who was the general of the United States Army that led the invasion of Normandy, as he famously said, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. So DeBakey saw a solution in ensuring that more of the wounded troops survived their injuries and were therefore able to take advantage of their combat experience by not only living, but also returning to combat. So his idea was an alternative to the system of portable surgical hospitals and field hospitals and general hospitals that were used during World War II. So MASHs were designed to get experienced medical personnel closer to the front so that the wounded could be treated sooner and with greater success. Now, casualties were first treated at the point of injury through buddy aid and then routed through battalion aid stations for emergency stabilising surgery, before then finally being routed to the MASH for the most extensive treatment. Now, that as a strategy was so successful that during the Korean War, a seriously wounded soldier who actually made it to the MASH unit alive had a greater than 97% chance of survival once he received treatment. And they're the sorts of statistics that win wars. So what DeBakey and his colleagues saw that nobody else had done to that point was that the real problem underlying this was a logistical one. How do we get our wounded treated better and faster so that their chances of survival increase? And that means that if their chances of survival increase, they can be redeployed to the front line more effectively and more quickly. Now, solving that problem required a logistical solution that could be put to the that could put the medical personnel who could treat the wounded closer to them. And the existing logistics just simply weren't doing that. Now, that is the kind of thinking that is routinely produced by the use of a logistics mindset rather than a traditional or typical mindset when applied to a problem of that nature. Now, logistics corridors that I've referenced already are the space between the movement of a product or service or an idea from point A to point B. And typically, we refer to two types of logistics corridor: the obvious ones and the hidden ones. Now, obvious logistics corridors are ones that we typically think of as transport. And when you think about transport, you think about it in a very traditional way. It's trucks, trains, ships, planes, and they all use very traditional physical infrastructure like roads, railway lines, shipping channels, and airspace. Now, they're all used to physically transport goods and people around the world. And as important as these obvious logistics corridors are, the reality is that they are just that. They're obvious. They're easy to see, easy to recognise or understand. And they're also relatively easy to optimise. So whatever you do in that space, working within the obvious logistics corridors, is probably likely to be just matching what somebody else is already doing, which means that there's very little competitive advantage to be found in those obvious logistics corridors, which means that the real opportunity, but also the real threat, comes from the hidden corridors. Typically a business in a planning cycle or in a strategy setting environment will produce or undertake a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the opportunities and threats almost always don't get the level of attention and thought that's required. And that's because they are almost always insular in thinking. Very rarely do you see opportunities and threats be articulated in a business around what is really changing in the world and what the future might look like. And that's simply because the people who are identifying those opportunities and threats aren't looking at what the core underlying facets are that shape the future, like logistics. So opportunities and threats is something that requires significantly more attention and a different mindset to get the right outcome from most businesses. Now, when I talk about opportunities and threats coming from hidden corridors, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, and it's one that we can all relate to when we're actually able to get out of our homes and carry on our normal lives, and that's an example in hospitality. So when we go to a restaurant or something like that, if we were to identify or map sitting in a restaurant what we see as being the transport corridors, most of us will think about things like the supply chain of ingredients and so on into the kitchen from wherever from the manufacturer or supplier, wherever they come from. And we will recognise that they come to the store by truck or van or helicopter or plane or what have you. But the hidden corridors are typically the things that we don't think of and how they happen, which are often front of house. So all of the movement that goes on in a restaurant itself, getting meals from the kitchen to the table and back again, is a logistics task. But typically, businesses that operate in that sector don't think of it that way. They think of it as a customer service requirement. Now, you might say, well, why does that matter? What difference is it going to make? Well, the difference will be in where you invest your money in training your staff. So currently, people are trained to lay out tableware the right way and to smile at customers and engage in small talk and explain the menu, things of that nature, all of which is important and must be done. But almost no attention is ever given to the actual efficiency of how people move around front of house. And the consequence of that is cost. So I don't know how many times you've sat in a restaurant and somebody will bring something out to the table and then go away empty-handed or not pick something up from another table and take it back to the kitchen. It's a wasted opportunity. Making every one of those movements count means that you can reduce the number of movements. And if you can reduce the number of movements, you can cut the cost out of it. And ultimately, that's what customers want. That's part of the customer service. It's also about the efficiency from the process, reducing the cost so you can reduce your price and delight customers in that manner also. Also, customers don't like waiting for longer than they need to simply because of an inefficient process, don't like sitting there after they've eaten, waiting all night for the bill and that sort of thing. And all of these things would be different if restaurant operators recognised that training needed to be given to their staff front of house about efficiency and about logistics. And that's the thinking that underlies a lot of what I'm talking about. Now, I'm not suggesting that every restaurant should just morph itself into McDonald's. Ultimately, though, McDonald's is a great example of a logistics mindset really changing the manner in which restaurant operations work and the efficiency that was generated by systematising what they do was just enormous. Now, it's gone to a level in a fast food environment where it is just that. It's for customers specifically looking for a fast food experience. I'm not suggesting that's for everyone. But there is a lot to be gained from picking up the thinking and applying it in a traditional setting to improve customer service and keep people focused on what customers actually value. The other thing, the other example, of course, is enabled by technology these days is cloud-based computing and the warehousing of data. In the old days, it was all resided in our own computers on our desks, and we could only access it when we were at our computer. And of course, now we can access any information from anywhere in the world because it's all stored in the cloud. Again, it's a logistical solution. It's prevented the need to go to your regular desktop computer to access information and allow you to do it from anywhere. It is solved for a significant logistics problem. It is not just a technological thing. It's solving for a logistical issue. Banking isn't a bad example. We've seen a lot of change in the banking sector, particularly retail banking, the branches and that sort of thing. COVID has demonstrated how irrelevant the traditional distribution model of banking is using physical infrastructure like bank branches. We've seen recently a significant number of banks announce branch closures, the redirecting of staff from branches to do other things like assist small businesses obtaining financial assistance through the impact of COVID. And banking as an industry has changed dramatically as a consequence of that type of development. In the old days, of course, it was all about moving cash around from branch to back to a central storage, a vault somewhere, using Armaguard and businesses like that. And then it evolved eventually through to technologies such as ATMs, back when we still utilised cash, but allowing easy access to be distributed closer to people in locations such as petrol stations and so on. And of course, now cash has just become increasingly irrelevant. So ATMs are actually starting to reduce in numbers as we move to online transactions only. So all of that was quite predictable through the utilisation of a logistics mindset. The other one's 3D printing. You could easily look at 3D printing as simply a manufacturing process. But if you only ever looked at it as a manufacturing process, it would never have actually evolved. And because logisticians saw that the overall objective was to get a manufactured product to the end user, the manufacturing aspect was reduced to a logistics corridor within a broader landscape rather than being the landscape itself. So the outcome is that the manufacturing process is increasingly occurring in multiple locations rather than a single location, and that transport task is reduced to local delivery of raw material and manufactured product. So the lesson in all of this is that to really understand logistics, the opportunities and the associated risks, you need to adopt a logistics mindset. You need the clarity to quickly identify logistics corridors and assess the relevant risks associated with it. And don't simply conclude that technology is changing the way we do things and that if we know the impact of technological change, we'll be able to see the hidden corridors. Technology is only one facet changing the landscape. The evolution of digital logistics is simply one new style of logistics corridor, but there are many, many more, just like that hospitality example I gave, which doesn't relate to technology at all. The other important point is mapping threats and opportunities is that many of them are simply iterative or evolutionary, not actually revolutionary. So they, in part, already exist. So think about a car. You know what a car is a wheeled motor vehicle used for transportation. They run primarily on roads. They seat between 1 and 8 people typically, and they mainly transport people rather than goods. That's what they were when Carl Benz patented his Benz patent Motorwagen in 1886, and that's still what they are today, the best part of 150 years later. They have controls for driving, for parking, for passenger comfort, for safety, and controlling a variety of lights and so on. Over 150 years, we might have added additional features like reversing cameras and air conditioning and satellite navigation or in-car entertainment. We've also figured out new powertrains for them and new kinds of fuels, but they essentially remain the same as what they were when they were first invented. Sure, they're vastly more complicated and more sophisticated, but more or less, they're the same as what they were 150 years ago. So they've evolved, no question. But other than successfully removing the horse from the carriage, there's been no revolution in all of that. And the reason for that is that a car isn't just a single product that was made ready one day and shipped around the world as a complete surprise to all and sundry. The car's a system. It's a collection of inventions that are applied in a novel way and that have evolved over time. So that's true not just of cars, but a lot of what is hyped as a technological revolution. And that's got very important implications for all of us in business, which is this. If you spend all of your time looking for the next big thing of the future, you will miss all of the little evolutions that are creating it right now. So Carl Benz doesn't have a car to patent without Lenoir's combustion engine of 1859, or Cugnot's steam-powered tricycle of 1769, or Roman roads, or gears from the ancient Greeks, or the wheel, which first appeared around 3,500 BC. So all of these things, and a lot more, are part of the evolution of the car, and all of them were inventions of their own that were applied in a novel way. Now, around your business are hundreds, if not thousands, of small inventions that will be applied in a novel way at some point in the future. And when that revolution comes, those that have already been using those inventions in one way or another will be infinitely better prepared for it. So no car manufacturer, for example, is really threatened by electric drivetrains or the development of the self-driving car. And why is that? Well, it's because most of the technological inventions that work together in a system to create those things are already part of an existing motor vehicle. So batteries for electric vehicles have long been part of any car. Changing the purpose of them, to running the engine, as opposed to just starting the engine, is not that big a stretch. Autonomous technology in your car's already been there for decades. Think about lane departure warnings, ABS, cruise control, self-parking, all of these sorts of things. They've already been there. So bit by bit, the self-driving car has just been appearing in lots of little ways for many years. And one day it'll just be the way it is. No one will be able to remember it being sort of anything different. So don't forget that cars were originally referred to as horseless carriages. No one calls them that now, and no one will call self-driving cars or electric cars in the future either. They won't refer to them as those. It'll just be a car. Yeah, it'll be improved, but it's still just a car. So I'll say it again. If you spend all of your time looking for the next big thing of the future, you're going to miss all the little evolutions that are creating it right now. If you add online tracking and payments to a taxi, you get Uber. The taxi industry could have done that first, and they could have done it 20 years ago, but they didn't evolve. If you add the concept of a test drive to an appliance retailer, then you get a business called Perch, which is a showroom that lets you use everything in it, including the ovens to bake cookies or biscuits, or you can even put on a swimsuit and take a shower and see what the appliances are like for that. Again, anybody in retail could have done this a long time ago, and some did things that are not dissimilar, but by and large, the incumbent retail sector hasn't done much of it. And there are literally thousands of examples like those. Everything you need to gain a competitive advantage is actually sitting there right in front of you right now. And all it requires is a logistics mindset that recognises you don't have a product or a service. You have a system. You have a collection of inventions that have been applied in a novel way and applied and evolved over time. And if you continue that evolution, and more importantly, if you embrace it, then instead of worrying about the next revolution in your industry, you may very well become it. You'll cement and expand your relevance through breaking down what you do now and looking for evolution through logistics. And remember, it's in the hidden logistics corridors where the real opportunities and risks lie. You need a logistics mindset to be able to identify those corridors, because logistics is central to everything we do. And I'll remind you of that General Omar Bradley quote: amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. So that's why, as a business restructuring professional, I always start when looking for a turnaround of a business with logistics. That's where the keys to success are. If you invest in your logistics mindset, you will permanently entrench your relevance, and your business will not only be able to avoid failure, but you'll thrive for generations to come. I hope that's given you some insight into the power of understanding logistics, the recognition that logistics ultimately sits behind everything, and to have a glimpse into what the future holds. The application of a logistics mindset will give you a very good head start in understanding that. So thank you everyone for your time. It's been a pleasure to be part of the program.
Thank you so much, Brendan, for that presentation. Some great practical examples there that I think will have our audience thinking very differently going forward. We do have some questions, so we'll dive into those. How do you make a habit of embracing constant disruption?
I think the answer to that, Alicia, is it's no different to how you form a habit of any sort. And that is that for a period of time, you have to force yourself to think about these things until it becomes second nature and natural. So what I would be suggesting businesses do is firstly making sure they speak internally, i.e. have structured meetings and so on to actually discuss the business, its strategy, the SWOT analysis, what's happening in its markets, what the future looks like. Do those frequently, do them every month or something like that, and always create room in the agenda for a discussion about what's actually going on in the world and what are the disruptive influences that are being observed. And that will take most businesses a long way towards actually starting to develop a mindset around all of this. But you would probably also on occasion want to augment that by reaching out to somebody who can bring additional insights into that discussion. But it all starts with rigour and ensuring accountability to make sure we talk and think and create time to do so.
Yes, that time is so important, and I guess also seeking those ideas across at all levels in an organisation. So you never know where the next good idea will come from, and everyone's experience at different levels would offer great insight, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Our next question is, how do you take customers on the journey of disruption while keeping them and their needs front of mind? COVID obviously has had us responding quite quickly to change, but how do we make sure that our customers stay with us whilst we want to introduce something new?
Well, that's great, a great question, and that goes back to the fundamental premise of my presentation, which was actually about relevance. So how do you maintain relevance as a business? And you maintain relevance about continuing to have a relevant offering for your customers. Now, you can take your customers on that journey if you can demonstrate their own relevance challenges and how you can assist them in ensuring that they continue to maintain their own relevance to their customers down the chain, and so on and so on. But it is a very effective and powerful tool in strengthening your customer relationships by being able to assist them in opening up their minds as to what the future looks like and what they should be embracing. And that's probably primarily in a B2B context. In a B2C context, it's often the reverse. So it's the customer, the consumer, who's actually embracing the trends or looking for the trends and expecting that of the business they're purchasing from, be it a retailer, manufacturer, or whatever else. But that constant connectivity with the customer, that ongoing engagement and understanding of what they want and their pressures and demonstrating relevance to them is the key to it.
Keeping those lines of communication open is really important. So moving on then, how do we get our people to align with technology? A lot of people see technology as a threat, or they're always looking to technology to provide the answer to the solution. How do we get our people working for us so that they can drive the change we want to see in our business?
So I think the answer to that, Alicia, is that technology only has one part to play in solving for a problem, and the identification of a problem and setting the parameters that are part of developing a solution actually comes from people. It doesn't come from technology. Technology is a means to an end. So solving for a problem may well utilise technology or may be resolved entirely through the use of technology, but the identification of the problem and the mapping of the solution comes down to people. So the relevance of people will continue well and truly. We just need to morph our mindsets into what it is that we have our people focus on, and it'll be far less short-term and tactical and more long-term and strategic.
So to our last question, what makes you optimistic about how businesses can recover from COVID-19? We've seen them change so much already. Surely we're in a time of great change, and it's just perfect really for that to keep going. How do businesses make sure that they can continue to do that?
Yeah, and really hard when everyone's sort of feeling quite exhausted by the current circumstances. Keeping going just is a challenging concept. But look, I think, as I said in my introduction, one thing that COVID has done is opened people's minds to the fact that we're adaptable. We can come up with new solutions when we're confronted with adversity that are really creative and can be implemented very, very quickly. And what's more, we've been able to do that and cut through all sorts of bureaucracy and so on to enable new solutions to be brought to consumers and to people generally that we would have perhaps not contemplated 6 to 12 months ago. So I think there's every reason for optimism that if we can just capture the learnings out of this experience and we can hold on to those and embed those as a way of constant thinking from here on, I think we can be really optimistic that we're going to have some incredibly exciting business models, product solutions, services, etc., into the future. So COVID's been a tragic event, but it has absolutely accelerated the recognition that there are better and more efficient and effective ways of doing things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. Your great advice. Don't let the little things pass you by on the way to the next big thing, and making sure that you stay connected to your customers, connected to your staff, and encouraging them to be part of that change process and build that logistics mindset within businesses. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me along.
Our second guest today is Paul Cooper, who will discuss the topic Automation and Industry 4.0. Paul is Chair of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Sector and owner and Executive Chairman of Rinstrom, an industrial electronics manufacturing company based in Brisbane. Today, Australian manufacturing employs close to 1.3 million people, representing over 10% of the Australian workforce, and it contributes over $9 billion per month in exports of goods and services, and also files more patents than any other sector. Paul will discuss how COVID-19 has put into sharp focus the value of manufacturing and its ability to support a nation during a crisis. He will also explore how Australia can ensure this time becomes a catalyst for change and that we harness the power of our highly capable, enthusiastic and talented manufacturing base. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for your time. We're looking forward to your presentation today.
Thanks so much. It's an honour to join you today. Thanks for joining us today at the 2020 Bendigo Innovation and Invention Festival. My name is Paul Cooper. I'm Chairman of the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, and it's an absolute honour to be able to speak with you today. Look, 2020, it has been and continues to be a year of challenges. It's been driving many changes, and in some instances, it's surprised many on what we can actually achieve. And I'll take an example is basically this event. You know, who'd have thought 6 months ago that we'd be doing this entirely virtually? And but it does prove the power of digitalisation and the importance that it does play in advancing Australia's manufacturing industry towards the fourth industrial revolution. COVID-19 has brought into sharp focus the value of manufacturing and its ability to support the nation. And in the Australia case, it highlights the breadth and depth of our capabilities onshore and how we can ensure that at this moment in time, it becomes a catalyst for change. So what we've seen, and there's been a lot of commentary around having sovereign capability and sovereign capacity in certain manufacturing. We've shown that, we've proven that in Australia, that having sovereign capability fills the gaps for sovereign capacity. And I'll go through some examples of that a little bit later, where we've used our sovereign capabilities through engineering and other talents to fill the capacity that we've needed for, say, the COVID challenge, and what challenges are yet to come. So what are the industry growth centres? So AMGC is one of 6 industry growth centres set up by the federal government 4 or 5 years ago. And it was really, there was an appetite and an imperative for change in manufacturing in Australia. Distinctly though, of the 6 growth centres that were formed, 2 of the growth centres, cyber and manufacturing, the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, they're both capabilities. They're horizontals, and if you will, they really intersect and empower the other 4 growth sectors, and they include food and agribusiness, medical and pharmaceuticals, mining, and the energy sector. So manufacturing touches each of these sectors, and it provides a national capability beyond just one industry alone. So we refer to them as capabilities. So manufacturing is a capability, not a sector in itself. So when I refer to, I might accidentally call it a sector, but when I refer to manufacturing, I'm talking about it as a capability and an enabler to build other sectors. So when the industry growth centres were formed, we had some clear objectives from the government, and that was to engage in our global supply chains with a view to building export for Australia. Secondly, it was to improve our overall workforce skills across the higher education, and that is TAFE, vocational and universities. We've also dug down to some extent into high schools, recognising that, for example, the submarine engineering capability, those engineers are currently in years 9 and 10 in high school. So ensuring that we have the capabilities coming through with the STEM subjects in high school, building through to university and the vet sector. The third requirement that of our objectives was to build and foster collaboration between industry and also between industry and research institutions and with government. So that collaboration has been promoted also through the projects that we have funded, over 70 projects. And every one of those projects, we've had a industry player, we've had value chain partners or supply chain partners, and we've had research institutions involved in those collaborations. So it's a key part of our projects to ensure that it's not just one company involved, it's a number of companies. We do give the money to one company, but we ensure that there's collaboration. The final objective of the growth centres is to contribute to regulatory reviews and reforms. And that gives us a direct access to the Minister and the Department to provide information on what barriers there are to building our export capabilities and what's happening in industry. So effectively, red tape, what we can do to remove some of that. So let's just step back for a minute and have a look at where Australia fits vis-a-vis the world. What we've got in Australia is we need to try and lift the overall complexity of the items we make. It's very clear, everyone understands that Australia is a large export economy, but what are we actually exporting? So there's a study that has been done that demonstrates quite simply that Australia enjoys high wages. So on the left-hand scale, you'll see Australia sits up with high wages, comparable level to United States, Korea, Germany, those advanced countries. So its standard of living is high, but the complexity of the items we make, which is the X scale, the complexity of the items we make and export resides somewhere between Trinidad, Tobago and Qatar. So while our wages are more akin to US, Korea and Germany, our complexity of what we export is actually quite low. This is actually unsustainable for Australia. We don't want to slide our wage levels down. We don't want to slide our wealth down to meet that line of best fit. We want to move our complexity of exports to the right. Just having a look at where we fit globally, let's have a look at one of those industry leaders, country leaders that I mentioned there. So putting that into context, this is what Germany makes. So it's shown there in a block graph. And a country that's largely ran out of natural resources decades ago. So it can't dig up iron ore or coal and sell it overseas. It had to provide complexity in its exports. So what you can see is that it's a manufacturing powerhouse of Europe and arguably the world. They add value, and the very first time they don't add value, which is the dark brown box over on the right-hand side of that chart, is refined petroleum. And even that is refined. Even that has some value add to it. So having a look at that particular chart, keep that in mind, that the values of products produced in Germany are high value and high worth. So how does that compare to Australia? That's Australia's value of natural resources that are exported. So distinct from Germany, we have abundant natural resources, but the first time we add value is the dark green box, the light green box, sorry, which is wine. Now, what we're starting to see, I see this as a huge opportunity for Australia to rethink what the nation does and what we supply to the world. And I think at this moment in time, we need to evaluate how we can take our abundant resources and add value. And I'm not just talking about the resource sector here. Think about the products that we produce. So we're on that chart there, we're exporting wheat and grain and food products. Now, a lot of those are not value added. Sure, frozen beef has got some value add in it. And I'm not denying that resources don't have value add. There is amazing technology that comes to refining some of our products and our ores and selling them overseas. What I'm talking about is the tertiary value add that happens in Australia. What can we do to add value to our primary resources? What can we add value to our beef, our grain, and our other produce that is produced here in Australia, sent overseas, and often we're buying it back with value add done to it. So in doing so, I think we can transition the country to make it more resilient, less reliant on exporting raw materials, but also add more value and be smarter. So when we first started the growth centre, we had a look at what the industry, where it was positioned at that time. And what we found is that manufacturing in Australia is bigger than what a lot of people think. You know, I get challenged, but I'm involved with advanced manufacturing. My own company, Rinstrom, operates in Australia. We manufacture in 4 countries, 5 companies across 4 countries, and we provide that value add at every opportunity, both here in Australia and overseas. But what is manufacturing? And a lot of people say, well, you're involved in manufacturing, but Australia doesn't manufacture anymore. And a lot of people they're thinking car plants, they're thinking that type of manufacture. When we did our first analysis, we found that manufacturing was being identified and defined by the ABS in a very, very narrow definition of manufacturing as being production only. Now, under that definition, manufacturing supports around 900,000 Australian jobs. So it's no small player. 900,000 Australian jobs coming from manufacturing. But there's more to manufacturing than just production. So we did a further analysis on this, and we looked at the workforce and how it's being diversified across the whole manufacturing spectrum. So this is what we generally refer to as the smiley curve. So the smiley curve has 7 components. You can see that middle component is production. But out to the left and the right, this is where over time that smiley curve has increased in gradient. So you go back to the 70s, a large amount of the value of manufacturing occurred in that central portion of it. That was where a lot of the value was added. Now, the value is being added in the research and development areas, the design of the products, logistics. Australia, look at where it is in the globe. It has to do logistics right. And then you've got the delivery phase, the sales, and then the servitization or the value add that happens at the other end. Across all of those things, Australia has a place to play to try and add value to our manufacturing sector overall. So looking at that wider definition, manufacturing is more than production. It's a job multiplier. It directly creates jobs across the entire manufacturing value chain. It's from highly skilled engineers and designers to production, sales, service, support staff. Under this definition, manufacturing is responsible for almost double the amount of jobs, around 1.3 or more million jobs in Australia. The other thing manufacturing is that it's a huge manufacturing multiplier. So for every direct benefit of a manufacturing role, 3.8 additional jobs are created elsewhere in complementary services. Now, this chart, this smiley curve, has been challenging to a few people, saying that you're now broadening the definition of manufacturing to capture everything. So let me put it in another context. Nobody would dispute that Apple is not a manufacturer. Apple's a manufacturer. Does Apple make or produce the iPhone? Well, no, it doesn't. That small value add in the middle, it's the lowest value add in the whole supply chain of Apple. And that is actually outsourced to a company called Foxconn, currently in China, although I did see media reports last week that Foxconn are looking to relocate from China somewhere else in the world. So the value add has to be a cost-driven, not value-driven, a cost-driven exercise. But in the iPhone, think of it, the research and development side of it is huge to try and keep ahead of the technology and ahead of the competition. The design of the product, the look, the feel, the customer features, logistics, how do they get all of those components worldwide into China, into Foxconn to do the production phase, and then deliver from Foxconn out to all of their stores in rapid time when a new product is being released or pre-released. So that becomes the delivery phase, the sales. Apple own their own stores. They've got major stores in every advanced city in the world. And the servitization, once you're in the Apple ecosystem, the value add that happens from the apps and the other values that occur within the Apple ecosystem. So that just puts in context what an advanced manufacturer, how they fit across the entire smiley curve of manufacturing. We also produced a sector competitiveness plan. And this is where Industry 4.0 has a significant impact. The ability for a manufacturer to transition to become an advanced manufacturer, it's about adoption of advanced principles, advanced technologies, such as automation. In fact, being an advanced manufacturer is actually less about what you make, but how you make it. So we do, however, have some way to go. And I think regions such as Bendigo have a role to play in this area. Jumping back to the smiley curve, think of all of those value adds. Do you need to have them located in a particular factory, in a particular location somewhere in the world? Yes, you do. But can you use your regional positioning to add value in a company across all of these other areas? It may not even be your own product, but you might be able to work in research and development. Ford still have a manufacturing team in Australia. They're all engineers and designers, but they're designing Fords that are being built somewhere else in the world, in Pune, India, and other areas. But this is where I think regions such as Bendigo can benefit from being able to be a global supplier from Bendigo, from that region. So let's have a look at defining those advanced characteristics. So recap, manufacturing is more than production. Manufacturing supports more Australian jobs than the official numbers suggest per the ABS statistics. And being advanced is not about what you make, it's about how you make it. So this leads me to an opportunity with Australian manufacturers to advance. At present, around 5% of Australia's 47,000 manufacturers make up 99% of our total exports. We can do better than that. Our vast SME manufacturing base is our opportunity here. Our Minister has stated numerous times in our meetings that she doesn't want to just see large manufacturers benefit from the changes that we're bringing about in Australian advanced manufacturing. She wants to see small manufacturers become medium manufacturers. She wants to see medium manufacturers become global players and make it on the exporting and the world stage. It's a key focus of what we're doing now, is to grow everybody, all lift on the same tide. So taking that into account, that only 5% of Australia's manufacturers generate 99% of our export value, we're left with 45,000 companies that could adopt advanced manufacturing practices. We can assist in that. We can assist in the training, the development, and undertake projects to assist in moving everybody forward into an Industry 4.0 context. If only a small portion of them did it, then we'd see a dramatic strengthening of our local manufacturing industry, a greater global impact, and importantly, a significant improvement in jobs and economic fortunes for all. And while 87% of those companies employ less than 20 staff, it's a breeding ground for growth. And I want to just hark back to Germany here and have a look at the model that Germany created. They created the Germany's Mittelstand. So Mittelstand is the SME sector within Germany. It's a 70-year-old German institution. It's ingrained in the way they do business. I have operations in Germany, and it's very clear that this is the way they think. It refers to any German small to medium enterprises with revenues of up to 50 million euro and up to 500 employees. That's what they define as the SME sector there, the Mittelstand. Almost all of them are still family-owned and multi-generational. They take a long-term view to their business planning. We do see it here in Australia. We've got Sutton Tools, we've got Varley Group, we've got a lot of those companies are multi-generational companies. AHB, 120 years of operations making mattresses in Australia, the King Coil product and others. But this is where Germany's manufacturing powerhouse is being built. They're hidden champions, building that SME sector to provide global growth. If you want to have a look any further at this, just Google German Mittelstand and have a look at some of the YouTube clips that are on why the Mittelstand is so important to the German economy. And there's some of them there. Look at the company Miele. They make domestic electrical appliances. That is a multi-generational Mittelstand company. And it's worth looking at the story of Miele and some of those other companies based in Germany. Germany is not all about Mercedes-Benz or Daimler-Benz or Bayer or Siemens. It's about the Mittelstands stepping through. We can see this as an SME advantage in Australia. Those hidden champions inside Germany employ 2/3 of the German workforce. Australia's SME sector base is our advantage, and I think Bendigo, this is an opportunity for the Bendigo region. Presently, according to the ABS, Bendigo can lay claim to around 170 manufacturers employing 2,290 staff. But we know that the real impact of this is greater because it's based on that conservative ABS definition. So I think there's more manufacturers than in the advanced manufacturing space inside Bendigo than what ABS are recognising. So how do we attract more of those innovative, enthusiastic, driven manufacturers into your region? I think the success of regional Australia, it can be linked to how we foster those regional activities, remembering that manufacturing is a job multiplier. For every job created, 3.8 are created in complementary and support services. So it was once a big question posed by Angela Merkel to the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair. He said to her, why is Germany, what's the key to Germany's success? And Angela Merkel's answer was perfect. And this is her answer: Mr. Blair, we still make things. Now, I think that's key. Australia still does make things. Australia will always be a manufacturing powerhouse, and our minister has said that on a number of occasions. Australia will always make things. So in Germany, those companies employ 20 million people. They produce 40% of the gross investment, along with 30% of exports. Compare that to 5% of our manufacturers contributing to 99% of our exports. So we have a way to go, but this is the core enabler to get Australia becoming the manufacturing powerhouse that it deserves. How do we build and lift our SME sector? We can do this by empowering those hidden champions. And this is where AMGC can and has assisted. With over 2,200 members, we've got hundreds of industry partners and 70 tangible projects demonstrating what good looks like. So we need to support them to advance, and by adopting Industry 4.0 practices, encouraging them to see the return on their investment, encourage deeper collaboration, and by doing so, unlock greater commercialisation of research. And we can do this by adding value, keeping value in mind. Then we can scale them up and unlock jobs, prosperity, and opportunities for Australia. What I want to do is focus a little bit on a pure example, and this is the example of what's happened in these last few months with COVID. So take, for example, the Notice invasive ventilator program. It's proof of the power of the capability we have onshore. I mentioned earlier that Australia has sovereign capability, but it doesn't have sovereign capacity in certain products. So, for example, we weren't making any invasive ventilators in Australia. So the government tasked us to come up with a solution. And that collaborative effort between government, industry, and research partners, all of whom came together to solve one problem, and that is how to make invasive ventilators onshore during a global crisis. So there wasn't any manual, there was no guide, there was just a willingness and a latent capability that was identified. So in under 3 months, AMGC, Grey Innovation, and our other partners, the ones that are noted on that screen, came together and assembled a local supply chain, a local capability that began delivering world-class invasive ventilators locally. Now, these invasive ventilators, we couldn't just go out and make a new, invent one. We had to get a ventilator manufactured in Australia, produced in Australia, but one that was familiar to the clinicians and the nursing staff in the ICU wards, in the EDs around Australia. They needed a ventilator that they were familiar with, were trained on, and so we chose a particular ventilator that had all of those capabilities. They've been in universities for years and in teaching hospitals for years. They might look a little bit dated, but they were familiar to the current clinicians, which was a key ingredient in ensuring that this could happen. So in doing so, we now have the capability and capacity to be able to develop these in Australia, and we've done that. So that process employed directly an additional 325 people, delivering critical care equipment into the nation. So 2,000 additional ventilators came from that project. I hope we don't need it. And I know in Bendigo and Greater Victoria, you have major problems down there right at the moment. In late August 2020, there are problems. We hope we never have to open one box of these ventilators. And even if we don't, they could end up on the foreign aid budget for the rest of the world. But we have that capability and capacity here right now. It's proof positive that our onshore capability and where our regional areas can be focusing in our attention and get those companies, give them growth potential, give them sustainable growth by offtake agreements with our health authorities across Australia. COVID also flushed out other latent capabilities in other areas such as gowns and masks right across Australia. We went from producing 2 million N95 masks per annum in Australia to now producing 200 million per annum out of Australia for surgical masks. I think it's a huge achievement to the country. So following on from the COVID response with the invasive ventilators, in early March, we did not know what the impact would be for COVID. So we put a call out to the Australian manufacturing sector and asked them what can they do to help. So the response was outstanding. We had 2,500 companies spread across the entire country offering all manner of services and support. So from ceramic and additive manufacturing to portable isolation wards, negative pressure rooms, we were completely blown away by the support and the offers that came through from the Australian manufacturing sector. Some of these companies went on to manufacture ventilators, as I mentioned, through Grey Innovations, the Notice ventilator, face masks, face shields, hand sanitizers. We had companies pivot from making gin to making hand sanitizers, isolation gowns, and the like. This was a new discipline for many, but for most, it was one that the business had the core capability and offered resilience in their own business and to Australia. So it was for this reason the World Economic Forum looked at what was happening and it recognised the importance, the role of SMEs played in the COVID recovery. In these 2 points, the World Economic Forum reported that COVID exposed some weaknesses, but it also highlighted amazing opportunities, particularly for manufacturers. The impact of the coronavirus has shown us that things may be about to change, but the global spreading of the supply chain and the pursuit of efficiency that had been celebrated for years has put countries into difficult situations. And we saw that in Australia. Industry 4 and its associated use of innovative technologies will have a significant role to play in a post-COVID recovery. IoT, digitalisation, advanced technologies, they'll be a great equaliser and support many businesses wishing to bring it home or to reshore. In the wake of COVID, AMGC has been inundated with calls for companies wanting to reshore their manufacturing back to Australia. Bringing it home, sometimes it's seen as a patriotic move, but for others, it's been a prudent business decision. And it always should be bound on a sound business case and with the right fundamentals at its core, such as competing on value, not cost. AMGC role, and I think Bendigo's as well, will be to facilitate this desire and to support those hidden champions to reshore. We've seen reshoring occurring in the plastics manufacture and in some other advanced technologies that are being brought back into every state that AMGC works across the whole of Australia, and we're seeing that happen in every state. The World Economic Forum discussion, it prompted us to then have a deeper look at what AMGC already knew. And while there's no surprise that manufacturing operations centred around areas of high population, it was the breadth of the spread into the regions that reinforced the importance of SMEs and their existence in those regional centres. So Cairns, Townsville, Bathurst, Orange, Bendigo, Launceston, Burnie, Geraldton, all of these regions have a significant impact today. And I think the full impact of that could be far greater into the future. We need to try and work out how we support with infrastructure such as inland rail to ensure that the regions are benefiting from global growth and Australia's turnaround to becoming manufacturers again. Some are already employing advanced manufacturing technologies and practices within their business, but we need to continue to educate and support and encourage these manufacturers to scale up, to do more, and to do what they do best and advance Australia. Everybody step forward. So what is the hidden renaissance that the World Economic Forum spoke about? I'll quote them. And they said, it's possible that we may be at the forefront of another manufacturing renaissance. It's just one that will have a local setting. While shipping containers made way for globalization, Industry 4.0 and the new wave of technologies and solutions, they might be sparked from this in an equally surprising way, but by the coronavirus. End quote. So the German example of SMEs building, the lion's share of those are Industry 4.0 adopters, and it was the middle organisations in Germany that adopted Industry 4.0 earlier, not the larger ones. The larger ones were the ones that came on later on. So Industry 4.0, because small and medium manufacturers are nimble, they're able to take advantage of Industry 4.0 without the legacy infrastructure of large operating plants. It appears, I think, that Bendigo is already mobilising as a collective. From what I'm seeing in Bendigo, and even this conference, is that it's mobilising as a collective. Now's the time to embrace those Industry 4.0 standards and unlock the quality, the value, and the productivity gains that it can bring to the whole nation. I think people are understanding what's happening. So COVID's been highlighted as benefiting the regions. 86% of Australia's population is urbanised. 56% live in just 5 cities in Australia, and almost all of the population is within 100 kilometres of the coast. So in that way, we're very, very similar to Canada, for example. 80% of the population lives within 100 kilometres of the US border. In Australia, we have 86% living on less than 2% of the land mass. So we've got this high concentration in the 5 largest cities, and with almost all of Australia living in an urbanised environment. That said, I think there's going to be a shift towards, as been prefaced in the media, a change. And that is underway with people looking to reconnect with their families, their communities, and their region. And I think this is an opportune time for Bendigo to foster this change and to build the areas of prosperity for the future. I think this is something where Bendigo is going to be a huge beneficiary of it. So I've got staff in Victoria, in my own business, in Renstrom. They can't leave their Melbourne environs, so they can't get out into the regions. If they were in the regions, they could move reasonably freely within those regions. I've got staff in Michigan who have been diagnosed with coronavirus. They don't have freedom of movement around the area. I've got staff in Illinois who have been diagnosed with coronavirus, so they can't come to work and they can't come in and move around with customers. It's limiting, because of the environment, it's limiting what they can do and where they are because of heavy, large cities where the coronavirus is expanding. I think Bendigo, like Toowoomba, Wellcamp area, like Orange, Bathurst, Wagga, all of those areas around Australia, all of those, Moree included, are on the path of that inland rail line. I think there's going to be benefits that we're all going to pick up as time goes on. And just finally, what I'd like to do is just 3 particular ads here. First of all, become a member of AMGC. It's free. So we've got 2,500 members already, all benefiting from the collaboration between each other, but between government, between university sector. So jump on there. Follow us on Twitter, and there's my Twitter handle there as well. But so become a member of AMGC. It's free. Contact Tyson, and Tyson can record your membership there, and then you can be part of that advanced manufacturing ecosystem. There's the Manufacturing Academy. I've spoken a few times about Industry 4.0, what it is, what does it look like. Great. Jump on. If you're not sure, even if you are sure and you want to get some pointers towards it, join the Manufacturing Academy. Again, it's free. We have over 40 hours of video content, training materials. It's a full learning management system. It's a full LMS that guides you through each one of the courses leading to the next and building on that training as you go through, micro-credentialing you all the way through. And it's not being done by trainers who know nothing about it. Every one of those videos have been produced by manufacturers like you and I. So they've gone through our programs, and then they've stood up and said, I want to pay it forward. I want to be the face on this video. And there's people like Ty Hermans at Evolve down at Crestmead. There's Elphinstones in Tasmania. There's businesses right across Australia who have given their time to assist the rest of us as manufacturers to move into Industry 4.0 free, log on and register. And you can get your staff to do it. I mean, it doesn't matter whether the staff are overseas or not. It doesn't matter. They can go through this same program. The other one I'll give a plug for, which is the AMGC COVID-19 Response Register. Again, it's free. It's it's Tinder for manufacturing. It's partnering up manufacturers with other manufacturers, with suppliers, with users of product that's going to be useful in the coronavirus response. So we've already got collaborations that are happening there on a daily basis, buyers and sellers engaging to ensure that they're able to produce product that's going to assist in the coronavirus response. That is happening. One of the early gains in this one is shortly after we produced the register, we were contacted by an international medical appliance company, and they said, we've just got an order where we have to supply 800 ICU beds to a state government hospital group. I won't say which state government, but a state government hospital group in Australia, 800 ICU beds. Within 3 hours, we'd partnered that company with Bed in New South Wales, manufacturer of King Coil and other products, 120-year-old manufacturer specialising in bed manufacture. They came on board. Varley Group, another more than 100 years old, 132 years old, I think they are. They came in and assisted. Falshaw Casters in Victoria, they came in. Within 3.5 to 4 hours, there was an agreement struck between those 4 companies to produce ICU beds for the Australian response. That's the sort of thing that's happening with the COVID response register. Be part of it, be part of the solution, and I think everybody will benefit from it. If you have capabilities in this, even doesn't matter how remote, if you've got additive manufacture, 3D printing, put your details on there, and let's see if that can assist in the response. It's been a great honour, actually, to join the Bendigo Industry Innovation Group today. I think the forum is shining in times that are extremely difficult. Thanks, I enjoyed it, and thanks very much.
Thank you to Paul and our first guest, a business performance specialist and partner at KPMG, Brendan Richards. Our session partner today was Keach Castings. Thank you for joining us for the 2020 BIIF. We hope you enjoyed this session. Take care and goodbye.